The moment Pastor Gideon's voice went silent, I knew something was wrong. He'd been screaming about demons, his hands twisted like claws, eyes wild. And then, just like that, he froze, his body rigid and eyes rolling back. Everyone in the room knew he wasn't faking it this time. Pastor Gideon came to our small town like a storm. Nobody knew where he came from, but within weeks, people were crowding his church. He had a way of speaking that made you feel like he knew something others didn't. People said he could see things. That he was special, chosen by God. I used to go there every Sunday. He'd point out sins in the crowd, sins we hadn't even told anyone about. He knew who'd stolen from the market, who was cheating in their marriage, who had hidden money from their family. It was like magic. My own mother used to say, Pastor Gideon has the power. Then, things changed. He started asking for money. He said God needed him to build a bigger church, a place where we'd be protected. People gave him all they had. Some gave more than they could afford, and he'd promised them blessings. The more they gave, the more blessings he promised. People were selling their goats, their cows. Families went hungry just so they could give more. And he didn't seem to care, he just smiled, eyes shining as he blessed the money. I should have known something was off. But everyone was so deep into his promises, it was hard to doubt him. Until that one Sunday. It was just after he'd finished a long prayer, asking for money for a special blessing. Suddenly, an old woman stood up in the middle of the church. She was one of the poorest in town, someone who always sat at the back, silent and unnoticed. She walked up to the front, right in front of Pastor Gideon. Everyone froze. She looked straight into his eyes and said, "You know the truth." The pastor's smile faded. His hand shook. She didn't shout, didn't point fingers. She just said, "You know the spirits of the dead don't forget." That's when things got strange. The air felt thick. Everyone felt it. Pastor Gideon started sweating, looking around as if he was seeing things we couldn't. And then he laughed. At first, it sounded normal. But the sound grew louder, wilder. His eyes went wide and empty. He clutched at his chest, mumbling words no one understood. Some people thought he was speaking in tongues, but I saw his face. He was scared. Suddenly, he froze. No sound, no movement. He was staring, mouth open, like he was seeing something too horrifying to speak of. And then his voice broke out, sharp, twisted. "They are coming. They are all here," he gasped. People were panicking, but no one dared to touch him. I watched as his eyes rolled back, his body went limp, and he collapsed to the floor. The old woman turned and walked out, and no one stopped her. The next day, word spread that Pastor Gideon had left town overnight, disappeared with all the money. But the whispers grew, that he'd been found days later, wandering by the river, muttering things that made no sense. Some say he'd gone mad, haunted by what he did. Others say it was the spirit of the people he'd stolen from, those who died from hunger because they'd given him everything. The strangest part. People in town still hear his voice sometimes, late at night, crying and begging for mercy.